Testing. Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us this evening for Silence is Not an Option, or SINO, as we like to call it. We are delighted about our speaker this evening and are so honored to have him here and to hear his thoughts about the current situation and about hunger around the world and about how it affects us in South Carolina as well. And I'm hoping for like one or two of those good stories, you know? Wanted to let you know there's a restroom in the back to the right. And also, if you walk out of the door to your left, there's a building right there, and there's two more there. So just to let you know. We have some friends of Governor Beasley's here this evening and some special guests, and just wanted to mention your names briefly. Charlie and Mark Andrews, Cheryl Biggers, Stephen Bowden, Tom and Faye Griffin, Frank Grimble, Dingle Howe, Greta Howe, Alex Carrison, Sue Limehouse, Jim McBride, Walter McCracken, Erwin Morrison and Howell Morrison, David Popowski, Heidi Quayle, Joe Quayle, Bob Royal, Anita Zucker, Carol Stewart, John Tecklenburg, Mike Tinkey, William Tinkler, Melissa Vanderweil, Victoria Hansen, and our special guest hostess, Carolyn Murray. Also, Phil Noble and Nancy Noble. Welcome all, and thank you so much for being here. And a final, one last name that I want to mention is Jane Aiken, who is the prime mover of Silence is Not an Option. Jane is the one who finally was ready to take action, and she sent out an email, and it said, "Silence is not an option. We have to do something." And the email went to 10 people, and then it went to 10 more people, and it kept kind of going down the line. And she expected 50 people to be here. This was at the end of April. And over 350 people showed up. This place was packed. And it was packed with people that wanted to make a difference, but felt defeated or felt that their input wasn't important. And our goal here is to hear everybody. We want to know what you think and how you feel and what you can do to help make a difference, whether it's a little thing or a big thing. It's been a really, really tough time in history, and there's a lot of hate, a lot of pitting people against each other, when truly about 75% of us are somewhere near the middle, at least somewhere. And it's the fringe 25% that are the ones hollering and angry. And it's these fringe groups that are representing a whole party on either side. And Silence is Not an Option was created as a nonpartisan organization. We have Democrats, we have Republicans, we have independents. Anybody who wants to be a part of this group and do something to make a difference is welcome here. And we're moving along rather quickly. It has taken off in quite a hurry, and we now have over 1,000 members on our email list. We have over 4,000 followers on social media. I mean, it's exploding, and we're running as fast as we can to catch up with it and to keep putting on these programs that educate our community about the facts, about what's true, about what people really believe, about how much more alike we are than unalike. Most of us want the same things in many regards. We may have differences of opinion, but the whole point of Silence is Not an Option is to bring all those together who are tired of the anger and tired of the fighting and tired of the name calling and just the general tension that we're feeling right now, the general divide in society in the United States. And so that is our goal, and you're being here tonight. I know we have some of everything here, and that's what's so wonderful about this group, is that we're working together to make a difference. So that being said, there are index cards that you will see somewhere near you with pencils, somewhere near you, and those are for questions that you would like to ask Governor Beasley. So when you think of something as he's speaking, you might want to jot that down, and then after he speaks, we'll gather those and we'll give them to Carolyn Murray, and then she will ask questions, and we'll have a question and answer session based on your questions in the audience. So everybody gets a voice. And with that, I just want to introduce Carolyn Murray. I think everybody here knows Carolyn. She's been a news anchor with TV2 for 20 plus years. She, a native New Yorker, but grew up in Charleston, went to Burke High School, and by the time she graduated, she knew that she wanted to be a news anchor. So she interned at Channel 5, went to USC, and today is on the news as an anchor every night. She is our friend, and we are so delighted to have her involved with SINO. So with no further ado, I'd like to introduce Carolyn Murray.
Good evening, friends. It is so wonderful to see each of you here today, showing your passion, showing your concern, and showing your commitment to our community and, of course, the broader community. World hunger is a crisis that touches nearly every corner of our world. More than 700 million people are affected. An alarming number of people live with acute hunger and malnutrition. The drivers of world hunger, and I know our governor will agree with me, are complex. Conflict that affects communities around the world, conflicts in homes, poverty that binds futures, a warming planet that destabilizes harvests, and heartbreakingly, food wasted while others are going hungry. Yet, there is a paradox at the heart of this crisis, and we all know it. And it is actually that there is enough food produced globally to feed everyone. So the challenge is not just how to feed people, but how to ensure that food reaches every plate with dignity and with fairness and with foresight. Organizations like World Food Program remind us that food is actually more than just sustenance. Food is life, and food is opportunity, and food is a basic human right. Addressing hunger requires more than emergency aid. It requires resilient, sustainable farming, smarter distribution of resources, and a shared commitment to rethinking how we grow and how we move and how we value food. So tonight, we come together in this place, not only to hear from a world leader and my husband's new best friend about the state of hunger, but what must be done to examine our own thoughts, our own actions, and our own systems of support. To ask who has access to food, and perhaps more importantly, who does not. What changes can we make in our communities, our governments, and our everyday choices to close the gap between surplus food and need? And what can we do, starting right now, to ensure that meal is a right, not a privilege, for every person on this planet? So friends, it is my honor to introduce a person who has made it a life commitment to make sure that those who are hungry have food. Governor Beasley is a leader who has spent a lifetime serving people who I might call invisible heroes. These are people whose daily resilience fuels families and communities and futures. We know David Beasley as our former governor of South Carolina, and we watched him as he went on to lead the World Food Program and to lead the United Nations World Food Program from 2017 to 2023. This is a role, and I think that he and his bride will agree, blended grit and empathy and relentless hope. He earned rare bipartisan trust, nominated by 2 presidents, appointed by the UN Secretary General, a reminder that real impact actually transcends politics. And under his guidance, the WFP grew into the world's largest humanitarian organization, touching the lives of more than 160 million people in 2022 and mobilizing more than $55 billion to fight hunger. He accepted the Nobel Peace Prize on behalf of the WFP in 2020. And that was a moment that looked a lot like just a big high five to children and families facing hunger in conflict zones. And in his Oslo speech in 2021, the governor spoke from the heart about the richness of the humanitarian spirit and what really, really matters to those people who we very often call the poor. And he described their quiet strength and their dignity. The governor's courage and compassion have earned recognition beyond humanitarian circles. He received the John F. Kennedy Profiles and Courage Award for taking a principled stand on the Confederate flag issue here in South Carolina, an act rooted in seeking national healing and unity. Now, this is where things get complicated. We can't win them all. He went to Clemson University and studied microbiology. But then things started looking up. He earned his JD from the University of South Carolina. Go Gamecocks. He shared his insights as a fellow lecturer at Harvard Kennedy School and as a professor at the University of South Carolina School of Law, always bringing a storyteller's heart to public service. He and his bride, Mary Wood Payne, are proud parents of 4 children. I spoke with one of them yesterday, and she says that you are very hard to get in touch with sometime, Dad. And they have 4 grandchildren. Today, Governor Beasley continues to be a hopeful, hands-on advocate for global food security, humanitarian action, and international cooperation, working to ensure that when we say we mean every one of us. Ladies and gentlemen, Governor Beasley.
Carolyn, I think it's just time to say amen, let's go home. Somebody just died from hunger. A child just died from hunger. 60 Minutes, one of the most powerful documentaries obviously on the planet. Scott Pelley called me, and I was trying to eliminate the blockade by the coalition of the United States, UAE, and Saudi Arabia on the Hadida port, of which 85% of all food that comes into Yemen comes from the outside. Regardless of your views of the war or which side you may be on, it was a death sentence to the children. And so Scott knew that I was fighting this blockade. And so we did this extraordinary, powerful story. And we were demicing at the end of the story. And Scott looked at me. He said, "Governor, you know you have the greatest job in the world, saving the lives of millions of people every single day." And I said, "Scott, I do. I really do. But I'm going to tell you something that you haven't thought of, and it's going to bother you deeply." And Scott's a pretty sharp guy. He looks at me like, what could that be? And I said, "Scott, I don't go to bed at night thinking about the children we saved. I go to bed at night brokenhearted over the children we couldn't save." I said, "Scott, when I don't have enough money, my team, we have to choose which children eat, which children don't eat, which children live, which children die. How would you like that job, Scott?" And he looked at me aghast. "Oh my God, I never thought about it." And I said, "Well, it's not hypothetical with us. We have to make these decisions every single day." And I said, "You what?" I'm not going to say exactly what I said. I said, "But you know what really upsets me?" I didn't use the word upset. It said another word. I said, "When you consider," this was back in 2017, there was over $350 trillion worth of wealth. It's over $600 trillion now. And the fact that a child, a person every 5 to 9 seconds dying from hunger, shame on us. Then he went from thinking, "You've got the greatest job in the world," to, "How do you stay positive? You see more tragedy, more suffering, more death, more conflict than anybody I know. How do you stay positive?" I said, "Well, when I'm out there, it could be in Deir ez-Zor, Afghanistan, Yemen, and that little girl, that little boy comes from behind that war-rubbled building, 4 or 5 years of age, doesn't matter, and it's like a flower in the desert. That's the image of God. That's my little sister. That's my little brother, and that is what fires me up." And as Churchill said, never, never, never give up. And that's what drives me. And today, when I see so much division around the world, it breaks my heart. We're more connected than any time period in the history of the world, but yet we're more divided. I was speaking, I don't remember whether it was the G7 or the G20, it might have been both, but I give a private talk usually because I'm the guy that sort of tells them things that they need to hear, because 80% of our operations are in areas of war and conflict. 80%. If I fed everybody in this room every day for 2 years, do you think I know what's going on in your neighborhood? I know where the sex trafficking is, the slave trade, the weapons, you name it. Where the extremists are moving, where they're located. And we survey people all the time. And we'll discuss that. But we know what's happening out there. And we know what happens when people suffer. And so when I got the phone call about taking this job, I didn't want this job. I wasn't interested in a job at all. Trump had just gotten elected, and one of my really close friend of mine, I say my left-wing atheist liberal friend from Canada, we had done some work together in Kosovo and in Sudan, and Trump had just gotten elected. He called and said, he said, we at the UN are very concerned. He's a very senior UN guy. We at the UN are very concerned about Trump. So I laughed. I said, well, you should be. And so anyway, well, that was then. And so anyway, he said, are you going to take a role? And I said, no, I didn't do it with George Bush, who was one of my friends, and I really have no interest in a job at all. And, well, anyway, a group of Democrat and Republican U.S. senators called, and the men and women who control foreign ops said, you've got to take a role. You're the only one that can talk him out of it. I said, I don't know about that. I'm not interested in a job. Well, I ended up getting talked into it. And quite frankly, the team that we built, or not built, but he had around him from McMaster to Mattis, Pompeo, they understood the power and the influence of strategic, effective international aid. And so his first initial budget went down dramatically, but I was able to sit down and convince him very practically what would happen if you don't have strategic aid. And the numbers went up. In fact, we took our aid numbers from, generally speaking, I was raising about $10 million a day, give or take, to about $39.2 million per day at the end of my administration. Now, when Biden comes in, and Joe Biden and I had been friends, we weren't close friends, and so Samantha Power became the new USAID leader after Mark Green. And so at the end of Trump's term, I was raising about $3.9 billion just from the United States alone. And so I sit down with the Biden team, and I looked at Samantha and I said, surely you're not going to do less than Donald Trump. She said, that's not fair. I said, well, you go see how fair it is when I go on national television. And so we laughed about it. But the commitment of the United States was extraordinary, because the United States is the most generous people in the world. And we're the envy of every nation and people around the world. America is great because America is good. And as de Tocqueville said, if America ceases to be good, we will cease to be great. And so people would ask me, how did you make that challenge to the members of the Congress that were so divided? I said, well, you don't do it on Twitter. You can use social media to make a difference, but you got to sit down and talk. And I said, I walked the halls excessively. And it wasn't just in the U.S. House and the U.S. Senate. It was also in the Bundestag and the parliaments of Canada and the UK and France and Japan and Australia, and making the argument and the case, because I would get this particular question is a very good question. Why should I send my taxpayer dollar down to Guatemala or Chad or Niger when I got funding needs right here at home on infrastructure, roads and bridges, education, health care? Very valid question. And I would say, well, if you're not going to do it out of the goodness of your heart of loving your neighbor, then you better do it out of your national security interests and your financial interests. And I said, let me explain it to you, not hypothetically, but anecdotally. Because congressmen need to be talked to in a way that they can simplify it to their constituents. And I've yet to come out of a committee hearing anywhere in the world that the most right-wing or who did not want international aid would come out of the hearing and say, we get it. And I say it's like leaking water lines in the ceiling, and it's going to cost you $1,000 to go up there and fix it. Well, you say, well, we don't have $1,000. So 6 months later, you've got to replace the carpet, the sheetrock, the curtains, the mahogany table, the chairs, and it's a $100,000 fix. But oh no, you in Congress want to stick your head in the sand and act like little children and not address the root cause and run around and fight over where to put the buckets. It's a lot cheaper to address root cause, and it saves the taxpayers money. And let me just give you two simple examples. Syria, because the Europeans failed to address the crisis in advance, which was resolvable, 1 million refugees ended up from Syria alone just into Germany, not to get into the other countries, at a cost of $125 billion over 5 years. Do the math, that's $70 a day. I can feed a Syrian in Syria for 50 cents a day. And by the way, mothers would tell me, we didn't want to leave home, but Mr. Beasley, we had no food, no degree of peace. What were we supposed to do? Let our children starve? And I've had many tell me my husband didn't want to join ISIS or Al-Qaeda, but we hadn't fed our children in 2 weeks. We had no access to anything, and they blocked, ISIS and Al-Qaeda will block supply chains, and they recruit with medicines and food. And they would move. In fact, a Syrian, just a typical example, will move 2, 3, 4, 5 times in their country before they'll finally leave their mother homeland. You can imagine a Syrian who has thousands of years of history. Americans, we only have a couple hundred years. The attachment to the land is deep in the roots of their DNA and their heart, so they don't leave lightly. But $125 billion at $70 a day versus 50 cents a day, do the math. That's 140 times more than 50 cents to $70. So divide 125 billion by 140, right? Double. That means instead of spending 125 billion, they would have spent less than 1 billion. So if you want to increase the budget for better health care, infrastructure, and education, you need to fund strategic, effective international aid. Because of the fact that you didn't do it, it cost your taxpayers $125 billion, whereas if you'd have done it right, it would cost less than $1 billion. Wow. Oh, yes, there's some aid that's silly. Cut the silly aid out. Our border. Washington Post did this article. $60 million a week, $3,750 per child per week in a shelter along our border. For $1 to $2 per week per child, I can have a resilience and sustainability food program back in Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, Venezuela, Ecuador, whatever it might be. So, Mr. Congressman, it's your decision. A, $3,750 per child per week. B, $1 to $2 per child per week, or, oh, I'm sorry, there's not a C. Then fund this, they will say. I said, well, it's in your hands. And so we took the funding level up, 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 up. I took Germany's funding up from a few hundred million to several billion. France is up, the UK, Australia, Japan, South Korea, and we went from a few billion-dollar agency to $14.2 billion. Today, this fiscal calendar year, they've received less than $5 billion. We're not buying furniture. We're saving the lives and stabilizing the nations around the world. When I took this role, there were 80 million people marching toward starvation. Having been a United States governor, we set goals, objectives, benchmarks, put together a plan, executed with measurables, and see how we're doing. I'm thinking at that time there was 7.6 billion people, not now 8 billion, 80 million people, not hungry, marching to starvation. These are the ones that are on the brink of starvation. These are the ones that end up being vulnerable to the ISIS and the Al-Qaedas and the shocks that take place that end up in migration and then infiltration by extremist groups. I thought I could put the World Food Program out of business. In fact, I remember going to several, and I would go from country to country to country. And each country that I would go into, the first few hours, I would meet with the UN team, head of UNICEF, WHO, UNHCR, whatever it might be. And I would go around the room, and these are wonderfully committed people. How long have you been here? 30 years. How about you at UNHCR? 40 years. And then not being cute. Maybe it's not working. You've been here 30 years. Shouldn't your goal be to put yourself out of business? Shouldn't your goal be to give the talents, the resources, the tools they need so they're self-sufficient, so they no longer need your help? And then we would talk, like with my team, what's the strategy that we need so that this nation no longer needs outside help? What should and must we do? And so we began redesigning the systems. If you want to learn capitalism, go meet an African mama. They don't have to go to Harvard Business School. I've never seen anything like African women. I could tell you story after story after story, but one little simple one was like Biba in Chad. And so historically, the World Food Program and many of the UN and other humanitarian aid programs just hand out food. That's fine in a short-term shock. But the systems that we have today were designed 75 years ago, and what we have today is different than what it was then. But handing out food, you'll be doing that forever. But if you give, especially the African women, putting down water wells and irrigation lines and teach them and give them the tools. I remember we decided we would put down the water wells and teach the irrigation systems and how to do it the way that needs to be done. And 2 years later, I came back to that village. And Biba, she's standing there, and the gardens, this community garden, I don't know, 10 acres or something like that. And she said, Mr. Beasley, look, I mean, so much pride. She said, we're not only feeding our families now, we're selling into the marketplace. And we're buying our children clothing and medicines. And then she said, and I just paid for my son's wedding. It was so beautiful, so powerful. At the World Food Program, when we talk about rehabilitating land and greening up the planet, well, you can talk about mitigation all you want, but I have to deal with adaptation. Adaptation allows communities to survive in the short term. I've not met a beneficiary that did not want to improve their community, and I can assure you that African women don't want outside help. They want the tools necessary. I say that because factually, anecdotally, we rehabilitate, when I say we, our beneficiaries, over almost 4 million acres of land, over 300,000 community gardens, over 100,000 small reservoirs and ponds, dikes, 84,000 kilometers of feeder roads. How do you get your food to the market? It's not like you can drive from here to Columbia. I mean, a 10-mile drive might be 5 days in some of these places. 28,000 kilometers of irrigation lines. I can go on and on. Well, anyway, my first year, 80 million people, what happens? It goes up to 125, 135 million people. Why? Man-made conflict and climate shocks. Now, you might debate what's causing the climate to change, but one thing you can't debate is it's changing out there. I'm out there. I see it. Now, so it went to 135 million. Terrible. The next year, it goes from 135 to 276 million people. Why? COVID, supply chain disruption all over the world, and leaders were making so many immediate, without thinking, irrational decisions, shutting down supply chain systems. Oh, you had it strong. You had it difficult here. You had to really struggle to get paper towels. And I'm not being cute here, but if you were struggling in the most sophisticated supply chain system in the world, what do you think was happening in Burkina Faso? What was happening in the DRC? They couldn't get food. They couldn't get seeds for the planting season, or the fertilizers, or the feed for their livestock. I was the first international figure that I think that got COVID, and Christian Amanpour heard about it and calls me, and we had come back to South Carolina, and I was recovering. Some blame me that I was the alpha source for South Carolina, but anyway, I don't know. And Christian Amanpour and I did this global story, and Tony Blair saw it, and Tony and I are friends, and when I'm speaking at a college, they don't even know who Tony Blair is, you know. You do, of course. And Tony calls me, David, how you doing? I said, Tony, I'm actually recovering okay. And he says, tell me, you go to more places in the planet around the world than anybody. What are you seeing out there? I said, Tony, if we're not careful, we go kill more people with the lockdowns. And we've got to balance out a hunger pandemic with the COVID pandemic. If we do it right and thread that needle, we will maximize the safety and the saving of lives of people around the world. He says, so tell me, what are you seeing? I said, well, let me go through about 3 countries. And I went through 2 or 3 anecdotal, what was taking place like in Ethiopia, Nigeria, Kenya. And he says, you've got to go tell the United Nations Security Council, the leaders around the world, the reality of what you're facing. And I did. It was sort of the speech that was heard around the world that caused the leaders to realize they've got to think this thing through more strategically so we can move food supplies around the world. And not many people knew it, but we're the supply chain system for the UN. We don't carry just food. When airlines were shutting down, we were the airline that was cranking up, that was carrying COVID supplies and vaccines and testing equipment and ventilators and all the things you need around the world. And so when you've got an Ebola breakout, how do you contain a population? You use food. So we're the team that runs in when everybody's running out, and we use food to contain population so that the diseases aren't spread. Well, anyway, the number went from 135 to 275, 76 million people. You think it can't get any worse, and guess what happens? Russia invades the breadbasket of the world, Ukraine, a country that grows enough food to feed 400 million people. And while all the Western leaders were focused on the Eastern Front, not realizing there was more to this war than it appeared, what Putin was clearly doing is shutting down the economy because it's an export-based economy around those ports. So I went down to Odessa and did the famous tweet that was heard around the world, Putin, please don't bring famine to the rest of the world, because I was making the case that Africa would collapse if we can't get fertilizers and food from this region of the world. And so the African leaders began calling Putin to open up the Odessa port, and we negotiated the Black Sea Grain Initiative to end up resolving the issues at that particular time. But the number dramatically increased to 350 million people. And it hadn't gotten any better. Devaluation of currencies, debt in African countries, inflation, and it's only compounded. And the amount of available dollars now for foreign aid has been dramatically reduced by America and European nations. And there's a price to be paid. Nations will destabilize. Children will die. And it's heartbreaking. Absolutely heartbreaking. But I have hope, in spite of all the darkness, all the divide, and all the darkness in the world can't put out the light of one little match. And I can tell you in this room, there's a lot of light. There's a lot of hope. And there's a lot that must be done. I want to read you a text I sent just the other day before yesterday, if I can run it down, to a dozen some odd senators and congressmen. Because I'm the guy that meets with the foreign ops, weekly, not weekly, but monthly back then, and give them the insights of what's happening here and there. So, because there's so much division right now, and we'll talk about this, I think, Carolyn, in the questions and stuff, but this is what I sent. I saw this number the other day, and it's profoundly impacted me. 87% of the United States Congress claim to be Christian. Now think about that just for a minute, regardless of your religious views. Jesus said, if you love me, you will keep my commands. Jesus commanded, but I say to you who hear, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you, and pray for those who abuse you. And then I said, can you imagine if we could just get the Christians to follow the command of the one they claim to so follow? There's so much hatred in our country right now. We're balkanizing our nation. Another 5 to 10 years of this, and we will become a balkanized America. And as you heard just a matter of minutes ago, I don't know the number, it's like 15% of those that are on the extreme left and extreme right that are dictating, it seems to be, all the social media today that does not represent the average American. I've been traveling around this country for the last many months, giving many talks about healing America and bringing America back together again. I've been meeting with Democrats and Republicans, and I haven't had one yet that didn't say they're brokenhearted about where we are. I have leaders all over the world saying, David, where is America? The nation we love so much. There's so much division in this country. I honestly believe we could shut down social media for a few days and cut off all news media. America would calm down. And people ask you, how did you negotiate with the Taliban, with the Houthis and Maduro and the North Koreans? And I said, you know, I didn't have the option of sitting in some little ivory tower. I had to sit down and negotiate access with people who controlled the areas. And you can go in there like this, and sometimes you need to do that. But by and large, you need to go in there and listen. Show some respect, not agreement. In fact, I saw an old friend today, Jimmy Bailey. I don't know how many of you know Jimmy Bailey. We hadn't seen each other in years, and we were right around the corner and had a little lunch together. And I said, Jimmy, you remember the days when you and I was a Democrat then. I'm fed up with both parties, by the way. And I got friends like you in both parties. I said, you remember the days that we would fight it out on the floor of the House and in the Senate? We would fight it out. And we'd go have dinner together. We were friends. That's what makes America such a great nation. But we've gotten away from that in the social media of disinformation and misinformation. And it was at one of these discussions that I was dropped a story on earlier when I'm meeting with the G7, the G20 in private, and I said, this right here, this was 5 years ago, will bring an end to democracy as you know it within 15 to 20 years. And Macron and all of them looked at me like, David, you got to be kidding. If I went back today and gave that same talk, they all would absolutely say, you're exactly right. So many amazing good things can come from this, but I think the bad is outweighing the good right now. And the answer is old-fashioned fellowship, breaking bread together, sitting down, having a meal together. It's hard to hate somebody you sit down across a meal. I'm going to talk more about that another day and around the country, because I'm trying to get Democrats, Republicans, and blacks and whites and this to sit down together and break bread, because we've got so much in common. I could share story after story in the U.S. Senate of how we have brought enemies together that break bread together, and after breaking bread a few times, they still disagree, but they show respect for one another. I got a lot of stories I can tell, but I want to stop right here and give Carolyn a chance for us to come up here and answer any questions, because the world is really at a crossroads right now, and I believe America needs to lead again. America. America is the greatest country on the planet, and America can't be great unless America's good. And right now, we're not being good. We're not being good to one another. And when we start getting our goodness back in order, our greatness will follow, not the other way around. Anyway, Carolyn.
Ladies and gentlemen, once again, our governor, of course, he's not our current governor. And a quick reminder, we have friends who are walking around the room right now who are picking up note cards. We will allow the governor to get a nice sip of water to wet his whistle. And again, we want to thank you, Governor Beasley, for speaking to issues that certainly are on our minds and our hearts every single day. But we also paid close attention to the fact that you were telling us that this is not just about us listening to what you had to say, that this is a call to imagine how we can all be a part of a process of improving our lives and the lives of others around the globe. And so thank you again for this call to action. And we already have some questions. Great. Okay, I think we're good. You may want to slip the heels of your shoes off because it looks like we're going to be here a minute. We've got quite a few questions here. Everyone has a lot to say. So again, thank you all for being a part of this and for lending your voice to tonight's discussion. All right, we're probably not going to get through all of the questions, but we will do our very best. And so, Governor, we begin with, do you have a hero who spurred your international humanitarian effort?
Mother Teresa was a powerful influence, and in fact, in my Nobel Peace Prize speech that you were alluding to, the quote you were actually citing was my quote from Mother Teresa. Obviously, she was quite a remarkable human being, and she would challenge people of all faiths, to go love your family, go love the poor and the needy, which was based upon the teachings of Jesus. And let me say this, because whether you see Jesus as a man or as a prophet or as a savior, the teachings that he had of loving the least of these and loving the enemy, they transcend all religions. And actually, those teachings go back to the Torah in Leviticus, for example. And it's in all, particularly the Abrahamic religions. And I use that when I'm meeting with Jewish leaders or Muslim leaders or Christian leaders, these teachings that are in all the religions, because that teaching of love your neighbor, that teaching of the least of these is what drives me, because that's my little, and actually there's a saying in the ancient scripture that says, all those who are led by this spirit, the spirit of loving your neighbor, those who are led by this spirit are the children of God. And as children, we're brothers and sisters. And I get frustrated with a lot of my Christian friends because the Baptist Jesus doesn't talk to the Catholic Jesus. And the Democrat Jesus doesn't talk to the Republican Jesus. And I said, but this spirit transcends all this division and binds us together as one human family because we're all created in the image of God. And there was a Jewish rabbi who teaches at the Vatican twice a year on, arguably he's the world's leading authority on the Jewishness of Jesus. He said to me one day, he said, you know that ancient verse you quote from the Torah of love your neighbor as yourself? I said, yeah. And I'm like, uh-oh, I'm in trouble. He says, well, the more accurate translation of that Hebrew verse is love your neighbor as your equal, because you're made in the image of God. And so in my Nobel Peace Prize speech, I said, you want to end racism, discrimination? See, every human being is made in the image of God. You'll think twice about what you say, because that teaching, love God and love neighbor, and that was the great teaching of Jesus. He said, the second is like the first. If you want to love God, you need to love your neighbor. That's the image of God. It's powerful. So I'm actually calling all the religions back to the fundamentals and back to the basics, regardless of your views of religion, because we got to get a way out of this storm. And so anyway, Mother Teresa was a great influence. And Martin Luther King, I talked about him in my Nobel Peace Prize speech too.
Thank you for sharing that. Yes, I definitely. And if you have not had an opportunity to hear the governor's speech, you can certainly find it, and it's one that you will have a greater appreciation for his passion. And one of my other, when I hear you saying some of this, it reminds me of another good friend of ours who very often reminds us that it is our responsibility to heal the world, to repair the world. Tikkun Olam. Governor, how has your political bipartisanship helped or hurt your progress in your international work, and how so?
You know, I called it the miracle on Pennsylvania Avenue, because people are like, how did you get both parties together? That's the power of food. In the history of the world, food brings people together. And when I walked the halls of the Congress, I walked both sides of the aisle. I had to spend, particularly in the first few years when you had the Freedom Caucus and all of that, the Tea Party caucus, I had to spend an extraordinary amount of time explaining to them anecdotally what's going to happen. It's the difference between wasted aid and silly programs versus don't throw the baby out with the bathwater type thing. And when I would go through it with them, and then I'd go meet with the Democrats, and then we'd come together, and then I would make appearances before the various committees, you know, especially in the United States, because, you know, my last year in the United States, I raised $7.4 billion just from the United States alone, $14 billion, $14.2 billion worldwide. So the United States, under the Trump administration, then under the Biden administration, because we brought the Democrats and Republicans together. And I literally can walk on the floor of the Senate, I mean, hypothetically, and they will stop and say, David, what do we need to do? It's such a beautiful thing to see them come together from all different walks of life, different political persuasions. And I used food as that weapon to bring healing. And I had one of my friends not long ago said, you know, you negotiated with the Taliban. How'd you do that? You did it with the Houthis. You did it with the Maduro. Will you try it again on the House and the Senate, the Democrats and Republicans? I said, that might be a bridge too far from even me and God. I don't know.
I think for those of us in the audience, I think sometimes based on what we see, and certainly through social media and generally broadcast media, that it's hard for us to imagine that those conversations happen easily. But then when we think about what you describe, breaking bread, we all know that when we've had that experience sitting across from someone, some conversations, you know, generally by the end of the meal, by the time you get to dessert, people might warm up a little bit more.
But you know, what I found out, I mean, it really, when you feed a few people, it's one thing. When you feed 160 million all over the world, you really begin to see this common thread of humanity through all the people. And when you really think about you're made in the image of God, you begin to realize, wow, there's a good wolf and a bad wolf pretty much on everybody's shoulder. How can I appeal to that good wolf? All right, this is off the record. Any reporter here, I'm going to give a little story this off the record. And I had, in that 60-minute story, blasted the United States and UAE and Saudi Arabia pretty hard. And the Houthis had like ticker tape parades. They were so excited that I got the blockade busted down. And so I was in Sana'a, and the Houthis, oh, you're our friend, thank you so much. And I said, whoa. I didn't do this because I'm on your side. I did this because it's the right thing to do. And if you cross this line with me, I'll bust your butt too. Well, you know, they laughed, and I said, I'm just telling you. 6 months later, food was being diverted. And food is everything. It's payment. It's keeping your family alive in countries like Yemen. And so it's an active war zone. We're deconflicting. I go to meet with the supreme leader. Actually, the real supreme leader was living in the cave, but he and I had a pen pal relationship. We would write each other handwritten notes. And this supreme leader was a child soldier, brutal man. We go into the meeting. He's sitting in the elevated chair. I'm sitting a little below him, about 10 feet away, and my team, we're in an active war zone, and we deconflict. We know how to do this, but this is a very tense, bad place where we are. The odds of getting hit were pretty high. And he starts off the conversation. Governor, World Food Program's diverting food aid. Yeah, right. And I'm like, that's not right. He said, are you calling me a liar? I said, I'm just telling you that's not right. That makes you a liar. That's your problem. There was no humor here. my team's like throwing up. They know they're not going to come out of it alive. I mean, and that's a truth. He said, you know, our tradition is you call somebody a liar, you have the right to cut their hand off. And there was the axe, right? He pointed, you see the axe right there. And I said, if you bring that axe down here, I'll whack your hand off right now. And it wasn't with Southern humor. My team is now, there's no way to run because Houthis with machine guns are all around. I can't remember how I diffused it, but within about another minute, because he's providing my ground support as we're about to move into the conflict zone between the different forces. And I say ground support, it's significant ground support. And so in these conversations, words matter, but body language matters more. And you've got to learn to read body language because it's the most powerful way to communicate. People know if you like them or not when you show body language, how you touch them on the arm, or whatever it might be. And I said, look, do you have me covered on the ground? And we have a translator. We have two translators, his translator and I have mine, just in case as I misspeak. And the translator translated, and he looked at me, he said, but the way he said it, I've got you covered on the ground. It was kind of like that. I couldn't understand the words, but when it was translated, I put his body language, and it was a smart aleck comment. And I said, let me tell you something. You might have the ground covered. I got the air covered. And you might get the first shot off, but I'll guarantee you I'm going to get the last shot off. He looked at me. We're like this far apart. Stepped back about a half a foot, leaned back in, hit me on the arm, said, I like you. No kidding. About a month ago, I was with some, still off the record here, special ops guys. You can imagine, anyway, special force guys. And this guy says, Governor, you don't know me. He says, but you remember that day, 2017, when you said to the Houthi leader, you got the air covered? And I didn't know if I had the air covered or not. I was bluffing. I thought I did. He says, I was that guy. I said, you were there? He said, yeah, I was there. We were ready to go in.
Yeah. Wow. You bring up an interesting point, though, is how food is weaponized sometimes in some parts, and something we didn't really talk about very much today, but certainly an issue I know that you're very passionate about making people aware of. I do want to talk about some of your time as our leader here in South Carolina. You were governor when our economy expanded with the arrival, of course, of BMW and, of course, Michelin. Was this the beginning of your international perspective, and how did you prepare South Carolina for the transitions with these?
You know, I'm from a little town called Lamar, South Carolina. We barely got out of Darlington County, and I had not done much international travel before then, but working with companies like Michelin, BMW, Honda, Bridgestone, Firestones, obviously opens up your awareness to the reality of the global economy and the world. And in fact, when Nikki Haley was recommended for United Nations ambassador, press called me and I said, look, the South Carolina per capita is one of the most internationally diverse economies in the world. We know the importance of international investment. We know the importance of what it means in South Carolina. So that opened up a lot of doors to me. And of course, we did a lot of work then, particularly in Europe and in Asia and in Africa as well. And so, yeah, I would think the governorship opened up a lot of windows of opportunity and awareness as much as anything.
Governor, of course, you very often, and I'm sure very proudly, your name is not said without, of course, hearing Nobel Prize recipient. With the WPA help in recruiting financial support for your current efforts, was that influenced, you think, by receiving this award, that it has made a tremendous impact in how you would be perceived and your ability to raise money for food programs around the world?
You know, messaging is everything. And when I took the role in 2017, if you go back and think about the media back then, it was all Trump, 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 Trump. And I would tell the media, I don't care if you love or hate the guy, there's more happening around the world than Trump, Trump, Trump. There are people dying over here. If the American people know about it, they will respond. But they didn't know about it because all the messaging in the United States was Trump, Trump, Trump. In Europe, back then, it was Brexit, Brexit, Brexit. How do you get above the clutter? How do you get your message out? So I was just beating the pavement every day. I'd go to Cuba and I'd fly and give a testimony to the United States Senate. I'd go into Chad and I'd fly into Germany and give a testimony to the Bundestag. Every single day and night, just on and on and on. And within about a couple of years, I had presidents and prime ministers using my talking points. And I knew the awareness was substantially increasing, and so did our funding. Well, the year before we got the Nobel Peace Prize, I had a rumor given to me that we might get it 2019, that I or the organization would. And we got all excited. And it's always on a certain day, Carolyn. And so I got my best suit on, you know, and got a nice little speech ready to go, and didn't get the phone call. And I told my team, never bring this up to me again. We do what we do because that is in itself sufficient. We feed hungry people. So they didn't bring it up again. So a year later, I'm in Niger, and I'm actually 5:30 in the morning, we leave in the hotel, and we're going out into an area where I have ISIS about 10, 15 miles to the south of us, and Al-Qaeda to 10 or 15, 20 miles to the north of us. And we're trying to break the supply chain systems, and the military's blocking us because they're worried about incidents of violence and killing our people. And so that morning I'm out there and I get back to Niamey, the capital. And I'm sitting in a small room, and I got the president of the country and the general, military general. And my phone's on the coffee table, upside down. And it's on vibrate. And it's just going buzz, buzz, going, blowing up, burning up. And I'm ignoring it because I'm pounding the table. I've got to have access. If I don't get the access to reach these people, ISIS and Al-Qaeda will recruit and grow, and they will overthrow your country. You will have a coup within 12 to 18 months. I'm the guy that usually knows a year to 2 years in advance before anybody else what's about to happen. I'm not even going to give it into Afghanistan when I warned the United States over a year in advance what happened in northern Mozambique. I can go over and over and over because we see it. Well, anyway, my staff bust into the room with me, and I'm pounding the table, making my case. And I look at him like, what are you doing busting in this room, And he says, Nobel Peace Prize. And I'm like, yeah. Who won it? You did. And so anyway, that was an amazing phone call. And, before then, if I wanted to meet with, Brad Smith and Microsoft at Davos, I couldn't get a meeting. After you get the Nobel Peace Prize, everybody wants to talk to you. And the Nobel Peace Prize Committee, I think, sent 2 worldwide messages. Number one, thank you, World Food Program, for your men and women who lay their lives on the line for children and people over the world. Thank you. And number 2, we know you got more work to do. We raised several $billions more that year. I am convinced because I exploited every opportunity I could, the Nobel Peace Prize. Surely you don't want to turn down the Nobel Peace Prize winner. That wouldn't look good in the press.
We will continue right now, Governor, with our questions. And this question is, if you were governor in South Carolina today, what would your 3 top priorities be to move this state forward?
I'm not sure I'll even get into that because I'm not thinking about the issues, but obviously the poor in South Carolina and the poor around the world. This is one of the things I'm hitting all over the world, but particularly in America today. We have poor in South Carolina. How do we empower and incentivize the private sector? Because no one's raised more money than I have for feeding poor people. Is charity important? Yes, but it's not the long-term solution. The long-term solution is empowering the private sector, inspiring them to go out and care for the poor. Just in the last 2 weeks, I've met with two of the top food producers in the world, Cargill and General Mills. And I'm in really with these Fortune 50, Fortune 100, Fortune 500. I said, yeah, your philanthropy is important, but I want you to take ownership of poverty and hunger in the neighborhoods across America. So what do we need to do? Now, let me just give you this number. 200 years ago, because I've done a series of lectures at Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Johns Hopkins in the last year. And, you know, there's a lot of young people whose hearts are just, they're filled with so much angst, and they want to do so much, but a lot of them just want to tear everything down without thinking it through. I said, you need to understand that 200 years ago, when the world's population was 1.1 billion, 85 to 95% of the people were in extreme poverty. Today, less than 9%. So we have built systems and programs and institutions that's sharing more wealth than any time period in world history. But try telling that to the 9%. So the answer isn't tearing it down for the 91. The answer is, how do we reach that final 9%? So we've got to empower and do what we can to inspire our fellow brothers and sisters, places of faith. When I was governor, one of the things that we did was created the Putting Families First Foundation. And so when we were redesigning the welfare system, one of the things that I knew that the churches and the places of faith had to be involved. And you didn't hear some of this publicly, but publicly I was challenging the churches, for example, synagogues. We didn't have many mosques back then, just one or two. That you've got to help take ownership. And so when you think about every welfare family in the state, back then relational databases were just coming online, you know, so to speak. And so we took the list of every welfare recipient in every county, and I met with the church leaders, and I said, you're going to adopt every welfare family in every county, because every house of worship has a plumber, has a carpenter, has an electrician, has doctors, you know, everything. I want you to go and comprehensively evaluate the needs of that home. And I said, I'm telling you, you're going to be more blessed than the folks in that home. And I said, if you don't do this, now this is what I said in private. I said, if you don't do this, I probably shouldn't use this word. I said, but I'm going to beat the hell out of you publicly. I am going to plaster you all over the news because you say in your churches you care for the poor, you believe in less government, less taxes, and now I'm going to give you the opportunity to actually achieve that. And quite frankly, I think it made an absolute impact in South Carolina. But that's not a 1 month, a 1 year challenge. And so how do we do that again? That would be one of my top things. I'm not on top of the South Carolina issues right now to really say, hey, if I were running for governor, which I'm not running for governor. And, but there are challenges here as there are in, I was just thinking about college sports. Oh, I'm so fed up with money in college sports, I can't see straight. I'd shut that down. But anyway, I'm kind of kidding.
Well, we will allow you to go back to an area that you deal with more currently, and that is with food around the world. And when you served as director of the WFP, who were the toughest world leaders you had to deal with, and how did you handle some of those difficult interactions? You've described some of them, but if you had to describe perhaps the two most difficult, who would they be?
Well, Maduro in Venezuela, and how we met and how we worked through some very complicated matters. North Korea, as you can imagine. I can't get into the details of both of those because that's extremely sensitive information, but you know, maybe if I borrowed a couple of beers, I can tell you some stories, but no phones around. But those were just two. And sitting down with the Taliban, with the Houthis, but with, for example, the Taliban or the Houthis, usually the first 30 minutes, they're just ripping you left and right. And they'll say, oh, you're CIA, you're United States, and you're imperialist, and you're better, you know, you think you're better. You just got to listen to it and don't get emotional. And just remember, that person has got a good wolf in there. I got to find it. And that person has gotten so much propaganda about the United States that's so untrue. Be patient and wait your opportunity and start finding a door opening somewhere that I can touch that heart. And and it's never failed. And this is the problem we have today with social media and influencers. You've got to decide, do you want to look good or do you want to do good? Because a social media world where you're monetized by a number of followers, you want to look good to your so-called tribe, your followers, versus doing good. And when you're willing to be patient and sit in those rooms, and I mean, I sat with the North Koreans for 2 full days. And on the third day, they gave me the access I needed to reach people and to do the things without in any way capitulating or yielding any of our neutrality, impartiality, independence type thing. It doesn't matter with the Houthis. I remember sitting down with the Houthis because they're Muslims, and I would, after they vent, we would talk about God, and they were like, "Somebody, United Nations, go talk to us about God." And no matter how many bad things they may have done, you got to find a way to touch their heart. And next thing you know, we're talking about faith and talking about children and talking about things that we have in common. And next thing you know, you find a way just to start small and then grow some trust. And then next thing you know, a lot of things are happening. I mean, that's what we did in Gaza years ago. Before the war broke out, I was able to bring, the Israelis had called me, the IDF, Mossad, and the Hamas, and we actually moved, but that's another discussion for another day, about 5 or 6 years ago, that we were actually able to move food in because of the trust that we had gained by our operations.
Doesn't seem to matter whether it's dealing with international leaders or, the halls of the White House or Congress, that you find a common connection and relationships are built and made. Yeah.
The thing that really upsets me today is that, people in America are struggling for food costs, housing costs, healthcare costs. And I can't help but think in America, with the brightest people we have in the world, that if Democrats and Republicans would just decide, we're going to quit hating each other and try to show up the other side and sit down, let's work through some of these issues, because young people can't afford a home today. That's not America. That's what we need to focus on, whether it's in South Carolina or anywhere across the country. In the talks that I've given just in the last few weeks, from California to Wisconsin to Minnesota to this state to state to state, people across this country are struggling with the cost of living, struggling with buying a home, struggling with health care costs. I mean, it's heartbreaking. And our leaders, they just need to sit down and start talking again. Anyway.
Governor, you've been very generous with your time, and so because we still have a fairly sizable stack of questions, I'm going to allow you to pick 2 questions, and these will be our final 2 questions. This is risky, but here it is. Whatever you pick is what I'm asking, so.
This is not good. I ain't answering that one.
Let's see this one.
What the hell happened to Marco Rubio?
That's what it says.
And that's a good question. And Marco's a friend, and anyway. And
Did someone record that so we can send it to his friend Marco? You get to pick one more, Governor.
Okay. True or false? This might not be a good one either. Okay. The world would rather suffer than empower women, particularly women of color. That's actually a good question. And let me answer that, because we were actually talking about this earlier. When I took senior lead at the United Nations, gender parity, you would think that's not an issue in the United Nations, right? How could it be? They're in the United Nations. And I was shocked that they were just yakking away about gender parity in the United Nations. One of my first meetings, I said, how long have you been talking about this? They saw me as some Trump guy, so they didn't know what in the world, And I said, why don't you just do it? In my organization, And we're in Afghanistan, in Syria, in Yemen. Hiring women isn't so easy. My organization had 34% women. When I left, we had hired 4,471 additional women, went to 42% worldwide. My top 6 leaders of the organization, 1 out of 6 were women. When I left, 4 out of 6 were women, or 3 out of 5. I think we reduced one of the positions, 3 out of 5. But we managed women and women of color throughout our organization. And we empowered women. I don't think there's another organization in the world that empowers women more than the United Nations World Food Program, because we empower women out in the field with cash-based transfers and the tools they need. We have specific programs for women. If you want to make sure every penny gets to a child, give it to an African woman. Mother's instincts are powerful. Our organization was stronger and better for it. Now, how do you achieve that versus just talking about it? So we set goals and objectives for every single country in the world. And every quarter, you had to submit a report to me whether you met the goals or not. And if you didn't meet them, you had to answer to me. And after about a year, they realized this is not a toy. And our organization became so much more strategic. It wasn't about hiring incompetent people. It was about hiring competent people, male and female, black and white. Our organization of color was probably, probably over 50% of color for sure. Out in the field, it's probably 75, 80%. But anyway, it's doable. And it's not that complicated, but you have to be committed to it and strategically execute it. And a lot of organizations began saying, how'd you do that? And I said, well, when we went through the methodology, how we do it and how we achieved it. I think, and I may be not 100% sure, but Erwin here, I think somebody has said that we had more women in senior leadership in our governor's administration than any state in America. I'm not sure that's right, I don't know, but I know it was high. And we didn't do it for looks. We did it because it made us more effective. And so, anyway.
Governor, again, thank you for being so generous with your time and information tonight, and you've certainly given us a lot of information. I hope we aren't tested on every single detail, but we have been definitely listening intently. And one thing that I hope that we could leave tonight is, what can each person in this space do from where we sit and where we live and where we walk to improve the abilities to be healthy and have food available and maybe to support others in our community? What can each person do beginning tonight or tomorrow or next week?
Silence is not an option, number one. Number two, I would ask each and every person here tonight to go break bread with somebody of a different color or different political suasion, maybe different religion, and don't talk politics and religion. Talk about family, and you'll be shocked at what happens. Make that commitment to do that. It may be somebody that works with you that maybe just pushes the broom down the hallway. It may be whoever. And you'll be remarkably shocked and surprised, and your heart will be moved, and one thing will lead to another. Also, think about people and neighbors and friends you disagree with about issues. I was talking to a friend the other day. I said, what if Schumer, minority leader in the Senate, Thune, the majority leader, what's today, Wednesday? So what if tomorrow they hold a press conference and say, folks, we go take up abortion next week, the most controversial, contentious issue in the U.S. Senate. And Thune would say, well, Schumer is pro-choice, I'm pro-life. We disagree on this issue, but we are friends and we respect each other, and we go fight it out on the floor of the Senate, but at the end of the day, we go still be friends and amidst this very controversial issue. Well, there's nothing you go say on TV that's going to change anybody's opinion on that issue. But what would be the takeaway? from the American people, they'd be like, wow. They showed respect and love for each other in spite of the differences of one of the most contentious issues. And so America, this is where we need to get back to. And so think about friends you may have or people who used to be your friends. And, you know, I've heard friends, families breaking apart because of Trump or this or that. Come on. You know, get over it. Take a chill pill, whatever. Love your neighbor. Love your neighbor is the most powerful weapon on the planet. It transcends every political difference, every religious difference there is. And I think we need to go back to this basics. Y'all remember the famous evangelical preacher, Billy Graham? Of course, everybody knew Dr. Graham. I don't remember the exact words, but he gave this talk one day to a bunch of evangelical pastors, and one of the pastors stood up and said, well, Dr. Graham, something like this. If we do that, it'll set the church back 50 or 100 years. And Dr. Graham said, well, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to do that. I meant to set it back 2,000 years. We need to go back to the basics of loving our neighbor. Thank you.
Thank you. Is this on? Do I have this? Before you go, first of all, absolutely spectacular, absolutely moving, and we all agree with you. We just need to love each other. Carolyn, don't go away. We'd like you to stay up here too. Do you need help getting back up the steps? There you go.
I also needed to, I just said to the governor, I would clap for him, but I have one hand. So I should just very quickly explain that I'm still a child at heart, riding my bicycle, fell off my bike, broke my hand. Surgery's Friday. Please pray for me. Thank you.
Well, Carolyn, thank you so much for being such a gracious MC for today. And
Thank you.
Your presence, your voice, your steady hand, and guiding our program, we really appreciate you,
Thank you
so much. We'd like to thank you with a gift in gratitude of your unwavering courage to report the truth.
Thank you.
Right? And your community leadership, your constant support for SINO and our education programs. Thank you. The other one. There you go. This is for you. And this
very
comes
much.
from a local artist
Oh,
and actually local Mount Pleasant artisans.
very
You
happy.
do your news in Mount Pleasant.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. And then, of course, Governor David Beasley. Thank you, and Mrs. Beasley, and your brilliant daughter, by the way, we have to mention her, Sarah Catherine Beasley Imhoff, for making this moment of memories for us. Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing your inspiring story and reminding us how each of us has a role to play in bridging the divide we face. Your leadership lessons from the front lines and combating hunger show us that courage, compassion, and conviction are the actions we need to take. Thank you. Your ability to bridge the divide continues to make South Carolina so proud and a better place to be. Governor, as a token of our gratitude, we'd like to present you with two small gifts. One is from Susan Dunn with the Circular Church, and it's this wonderful poster. And please feel free to open and show it to everybody if you'd like. Thank you. And it is something that she personally wanted you to have, and it's because of Susan Dunn that we're able to have these events every month in this church. Got it.
Probably ought to look at it.
I know you better.
Oh, it's lovely.
So there we are.
It's beautiful. Can you see it? Beautiful.
Oh, wow.
I don't know which window it is. Does anybody know which window that is? It's one of the. Oh, it's one of these. Yeah. Okay. All right. And then secondly, you always bring us good luck. And we want to return the favor. We want to give you good luck. So in this box is a special coin for you to keep in your pocket while you travel the world. Okay?
Thank you.
Please feel free to open it up because there's a story behind it.
All right, there. Roll that up.
Okay?
Here's the cup.
Got it? You bring us good luck. And this gift for you is Lady Liberty. And it is the logo that we use for SINO.
Oh, wow.
And it is a 1922 Lady Liberty silver dollar replica. You can't spend it. Replica. And then it's a keepsake so that when you're gone and you're around the world and you miss home, remember us.
This is great.
We'll remember
Thank
you.
so much.
Thank you.
Liberty.
Lady Liberty.
Lady Liberty.
Freedom, right? Thank you again for being here. Thank you both for being here. And please give him another round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you. And when your brother comes, you holler.
We'll do it.
Thank you. All right.
One more thing.
One more?
Oh, is that up?
What do you want up there?
If anybody would like to have their picture taken with Governor Beasley, right at the back of the steps, right here at the bottom of the steps, we'll take pictures.